everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. This week it is back to work on the purple silk project, except now it is no longer an 1890s project, it is now a 19aughts project. I talked about this a little bit in the last video that I did, again, kind of on this project, on the 1890s version, because basically we are working on this dress right here. And I kind of started this a while ago. I made the base of the skirt about a month and a half ago at this point, I think it was, something like that. And at that time, I thought I was going to be working on an 1890s project. Just looking at this initial image right here, this only image that is on the Cincinnati Art Museum's website, I thought I was looking at an 1890s dress that was mislabeled 19aughts. However, they have wonderfully gotten me more pictures finally, and I can tell from all of the close-up pictures that this is in fact a 19aughts project. Now, what I was doing before was I was making an 1890s ball gown bodice to go with this base skirt, but now we are on to the actual dress, the day bodice and the skirt that has the ruffle. So I'm taking the same skirt, it's back here on the dress form, you can only see a bit of it there, but I am taking that same skirt and I'm adding the ruffle, and then I'm making the whole separate day bodice that is completely unrelated to the evening bodice I made, other than the fact that they're both made of purple silk. And the first thing that we're working on this week is going to be the ruffle portion. So what you are seeing draped on the form back there is the fact that I've actually already cut out the 4 pieces that are going to make up the ruffle. So I did a lot of math last night before cutting those out, figured out how much ruffle I need, which it's 220 inches around, which I skimped on just a little bit because I would rather have 4 panels than 4 and like a 5-inch panel. So it's slightly less than that. It's 4 widths of the fabric. And the pieces of the ruffle, they do get taller as they go around to the back. Now, even still, I did not get from the museum any pictures that were like on dress forms. They were all just like hanging on hangers. And B, I also didn't get any pictures of the actual back of the dress. So I don't actually have any idea just how tall that ruffle gets in the back. But basically what I did was I took my kind of side back height measurement and where the ruffle starts on the form. I took those, put a little pin on the skirt while it was on the dress form, and just looked at, if I continued that sort of gradual rise, where would the center back be? And it turns out it's not much deeper than the side back. So basically what I'm looking at here is the ruffle in the front is 16.86 inches tall. I'm rounding that up to 16 7/8 because, you know, I don't use the metric system. I live in the US. And then the side back is 19.16. I rounded that one, I think, down to 0.125 because again, you know, eighths are weird. And then this very center back is 20.5 inches. And then onto all of that, I did add 2.5 inches, 2 inches of which are going to be made up as the hem, and then 1/2 inch is actually just the seam allowance. Now, I talked about this a little bit in the last video on this project, which of course is linked down in the description, but the way that this skirt was originally made was that it wasn't like a base skirt with applied ruffle. It was actually an upper skirt that ended where the ruffle started, and then the ruffle for the bottom. So there wasn't any sort of backing from the ruffle, it was just the ruffle. And the ruffle, I believe, was lined, but it wasn't like mounted onto anything. I am obviously mounting mine onto this skirt. So the way that I'm gonna wind up doing it is kind of to draw my line on where that ruffle is going to go, like measuring up from the hem all around the skirt, and put that right sides together and then flip that down. Because over the top of that, we have an applied trim. And this trim is just gathered in the middle, it's just a strip, and it's bound on both edges. So I was also looking at how much bias tape I need to complete this project, both for the skirt and the bodice. And I had a bit of a moment because it worked out to, just for the double fold, like 1/2 inch showing, because there are more sizes of bias tape than I'm going to need. There's one that's a bit narrower for some of the like kind of trim parts, and then there's one that's a bit wider, but just that one that winds up being 1/2 inch once it's folded double, I need 21.55 yards. Now, granted, this is bias tape. Like, we're cutting out approximately like 2 inches wide strips on the bias, but that's a lot to cut out. So I'm gonna have to get to that quite soon, because all that ruffle is one strip across, which the strip is 3 inches wide. Based on the 1/2 inch width of the bias tape, you can tell that basically there's 1.5, 1.5, and 1/2 of each is covered by bias. So the strip is 3 inches wide, and that is going to be edged both sides with the double fold bias tape and then ruffled. And yes, I'm gonna be doing all of that by machine because I do not have the patience or the time for something like that. But yeah, that's where we are right now. So again, I have already cut out all of those pieces. They all need to get pressed because I cut them out before pressing because I was mostly ripping them. Though I did do a slightly gradated because it is, you know, slightly larger as it goes around. So I need to press those. I need to I'm probably going to serge the top, the part that's going to get folded into the ruffle, and then put those all together, gather up the tops, and I might actually hem them before I attach them onto the skirt. I just feel like that's going to be easier, and then they can be attached to the skirt. So that's all going to be for the first bit of this video, and then we should be getting to the bodice and figuring out all that. So I will talk to you soon later in this video about exactly how this bodice is put together. Oh, but for now, since I know it's as satisfying to you as it is to me, and I kind of prepped this but didn't actually rip it yet, here are our 3 inch wide strips for the ruffle. These ones don't seem to want to rip through the selvage at the other end, so I'll just snip those. But we have 4 strips of this, just like we have the 4 panels of the skirt. I've made what I think is about half of the double fold bias that I need total, more than enough for the skirt ruffle though, so that's what I'm gonna go with for now. This was like, I think 4 strips all the way across, and then like 3 strips part way across my fabric on the bias, of course. And basically I just used this really wide bias tape maker. So I have shown how to use these things before. In fact, earlier in this project, this is just a really wide one, and then you fold it in half. You do unfortunately have to do the folding in half manually. What I did though was I folded it almost in half so that I could get just that little bit underneath. That should hopefully help me later. I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to kind of put both of these over the edge at once and attempt to sew from this side. Therefore, because it's longer on the back, it'll catch that automatically. Or if I'm going to do right sides together and turn and press, and then it will still help having it longer on the back. But yeah, that is a little tip. If you do have it longer on the back, then it will be easier to catch that side. I thought that I had made so much of that binding. Well, I just finished putting the binding on both edges of all of this for that little ruched up piece, and I have this much of binding left. That was how much extra I made. I needed literally every strip that I created because this is less than 1 strip, and that means that I have a whole lot more to make for the bodice once we get to the bodice, which is again not quite right away. So I am now going to run gathering stitches down the middle of this, just like the long stitch length on the machine, and pull that up so that it can be put onto the dress once I do the ruffle part. I have not yet done the ruffle part. So the ruffle part again is now going to get pieced together. The 4 pieces are going to get put together, and it's going to have the top serged, the bottom hemmed, I think, while it is still flat, because that just seems the easiest. Put gathering stitches around the top and add that to the skirt and add this over. So I will check back in with you somewhere later within all those steps. My ruffle pieces are all stitched together here, and I have the hem pressed up in place. Now, I would love to be able to just machine sew this, you know, with this big ugly top stitch all the way, but I think it would be a big ugly top stitch. So what I think I'm going to do, since I have this pressed and pinned very nicely, and this silk holds a press like nobody's business, it's really beautiful. I think what I'm actually going to do is prep the top and do all of the gathering stitches and everything, and then just see if at that point it would still be a big ugly like top stitch if it would just look awful sewing it by machine, because this is a lot. Like, it's not all of what you see on the floor here, but it's a lot. And to have to hand sew that would really be a pain. So now that the ruffle is all ruffled and gathered up at the top, I always have to remind myself where exactly to put the line on my skirt. So basically the way this works is you take whatever measurement it is that is like, you know, 16 and 7/8 inches long, basically from the bottom for this first little edge here. And we look at that and we say, okay, well, that is a 1/2 inch down from here. And so the line that we want to draw on our skirt is actually a 1/2 inch less than that, because it is the edge of the fabric here that we folded under. So in this case, it would be 16 3/8 inches from the hem to the top. And to be honest, I will probably have this be 1/8 inch longer than the skirt, just so that I don't see the hem of the skirt poking out from here. So really that 16 3/8 inches is going to be 16 1/4 inches that I measure up the skirt, make a mark, and then I do that all the way around the skirt. And then I take this right sides together, meaning upside down, and I line this edge up with that mark and then pin that in place and stitch it, you know, 1/2 inch from the edge, and then it will fold back down and it will give me a ruffle. So just to break down how I'm doing the marking a little bit more, I've marked my measurements that I had already figured out there and there. This one, I literally figured out the midpoint. I found the midpoint this way, and I found the midpoint between the difference there to there, which was 5/8 inches up, and I marked that there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of connect the lines, keeping in mind, of course, that the bottom of a hem is slightly curved. It is not completely flat, so you do want to keep that in mind as you are making this line and applying your ruffle. But yeah, that just sort of helps me to connect the dots. This is already so pretty. So a few things. I am in the process of pinning down the ruched up trim. So I've just got this one little section pinned on right now. Before I'm pinning it, I'm going around and I'm just kind of pressing this just a little bit so that this seam will make things lay flat down this way. And part of the reason that I'm doing that is A, it's going to get covered by the trim, so it doesn't matter if the ruffles are like poofy. And then the other thing that I noticed is that for a lot of the areas of the skirt so far, I've been kind of pulling down, like keeping tension up here and then pulling down the ruffle to the skirt. And now remember, I only really measured like the start, the middle, and the center back. And that was where I kind of came up with like how far it should be up the skirt. Well, a lot of it's off. So I'm glad that I haven't done the hem on here yet, because I've been letting down a lot of the hem just so that it matches up with the bottom, because unpinning and repressing is so much easier than resetting this entire ruffle. So yeah, glad that I did that. It's just gonna be a little bit longer because again, I wanted this to get down to where it's like just about 1/8 inch longer than the skirt itself. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm going to finish pressing and pinning and all of that. And once I stitch that on, this skirt will be done. Oh my gosh, you guys, what a pretty silhouette that is. The hem still needs to be done by hand, but the ruffle is fully attached. So I'm super happy with how the skirt is looking right now. I am going to do that hem by hand, so that's going to take a while, and I'm probably just going to kind of do that handwork whenever I kind of feel like I just want to do handwork and I don't want to do any like actual come into the sewing room and do, you know, thinking type sewing work. So that's going to slowly get done over the next while. However, we can go ahead and turn our attentions now to the bodice. So I want to kind of walk you through the different elements of the bodice, showing you the pictures that were kindly taken by Cynthia from the Cincinnati Art Museum, and just kind of talk you through all of the elements of this bodice. So this bodice, for one thing, is unfortunately a back closing bodice, which is annoying. I would really love to not make it back closing, but if I didn't make it back closing, I would also have to find where the closure goes. So we'll just do a back closing bodice and I'll have to have help getting into it, unfortunately. And this bodice has a lot of elements going on that just kind of decorate and make up the whole thing. So I have already talked a little bit about how all of those ruffled layers, those are all trimmed with that double fold bias. So I'm gonna have to make more of that double fold bias. And I'm going to be looking at my pictures on my phone while I show them to you. So if I'm looking down, that's why I'm looking at the pictures on my phone. So we have 3 layers of that bias trimmed ruffle, 3 tiers of it that are all making that sort of swoop shape that goes from kind of below the bust, swooping over the bust, and then around almost like a yoke in the back. And then on top of that bias, or kind of between that bias and like the neckline area, we also have just a piece of what looks like very vintage. I mean, obviously this is vintage, this is from 1900s, but it looks vintage even compared to the rest of this lace. We just have a strip of that. So I'm hoping that I will have something in my stash that I can use for that lace, particularly because at least now, obviously these colors have probably faded and aged with time, but right now that color is actually reading differently than the rest of the lace in this bodice. It's reading a little bit more gray brown as opposed to like the ivory of the rest of it. And so we just have that strip that's going above where all those ruffles are, in between the ruffles and the neckline inset. We also have the same strip on the sleeves, kind of the cuff, if you will, of the upper portion of the sleeve. So I do have to make sure that whatever I do use for the bodice, that I have enough of it that I can take it into both places. And then I was looking at the lace of the neckline of the bodice, and at first I just thought, oh, this is Point de Sprie, and it's been edged with another type of lace, like a narrow type of scalloped lace. And we're talking about the center front of the bodice here. And then I realized, looking at what is being used on the collar and looking at the fact that I don't think I see like a seam between the Point de Sprie, I think we're actually looking at a wider lace, probably at least this wide. I don't know what that is, but like 5 inches, something that can kind of go in this whole area. And it has kind of a Point de Sprie look, and then it is edged with that sort of like almost a Greek key design and the little paisley bits that go into the scallops. And so what they've done here is they've cut shapes of that. So instead of just using a 5-inch strip piece of lace, they are taking it and making it a triangle for each side of the center front, and then just making a little band that is mostly just the trim part, but does have a little bit of the Point de Sprie, and that's what they're using for the collar. And all of these are presumably applied to an inner layer. However, that inner layer is still fairly sheer looking in the upper portion of the neckline. And then those two are kind of just loosely joined together at the center front, those 2 triangular panels, by rhinestone buttons. You can see that there's like a gap in between those 2 panels. So I don't know if that is something that it literally was only brought together in the buttons and that's why we're seeing that gap, or if that is just stitching that's come undone over time. Now on the collar, above that lace edge, we also have a bit of the blue, and then that blue is piped at the top and it's applied all over with little French knots in like cream thread. And then we've got what I can only guess is like a sort of tulle edge that sounds very uncomfortable. So I'm gonna have to figure out exactly how to do this in a more comfortable manner, but it's edged with this tightly gathered bit of what looks like a fine tulle up at the very top of the collar. We also kind of bring all of those motifs together underneath the bust with that rosette knot sort of situation, which is made out of the ruffle that is edged with the bias as well as lace. So it's like layered in with a lace trim. This is a different lace trim than what they used on that whole center front neckline bit. This is just something that has a very small picot edge, and I'm not seeing that edge anywhere else actually on the bodice. So this is something I think that's only being used in the rosette. And then below that, with the rest of the bodice, we do kind of have a pigeon front look underneath with a lace that looks almost like an embroidered net type situation. And we'll talk about that more in a moment, what my plan is for that. But it is definitely gathered very full, and then it's into a nice kind of pleated up, but in like a ruche haphazard manner, belt sash sort of situation that is actually part of the bodice. And I was trying to figure out, I don't think it is piped. I think that's just folded in at top and bottom within like all of those ruched folds. We're going to talk about the sleeves later because we're not going to get to the sleeves for at least 1, if not 2 videos, just to warn you. So let's talk about the back here. Now, the back, we already talked about the trims up at the top. They all come together kind of at a yoke. They don't mirror the shape of the front. And then below that, we see a lot of that sort of embroidered net lace. Now, my plan for the embroidered net lace, I have scoured the internet and I have come up empty for anything that, well, I don't know what to search for, I think is mainly the thing. I don't know what this type of lace is called. If you do know, let me know. But I've been searching for like embroidered net lace and coming up empty. So one of the things that I was then thinking of doing, and this was back when I was thinking that front neckline inset was Point d'Esprit, was I was thinking, okay, well, let me just get Point d'Esprit netting and maybe I can try to use my embroidery machine and embroider a flower pattern onto that. I know, making my life more complicated, but this project is already taking a long time, so why not add a little longer? And the thing is, they don't need very much of this. So if I can do an embroidery pattern that is like in the hoop, embroidering about 8 by 12 at one time, honestly, I probably only need maybe 6 hoopings of that, I think. And I have a pattern already that is kind of similar, of like a loose scattered sort of embroidered flowers, and I think that that might work well. I have not tested it yet, so that is something that I hope to test in this video. But anyway, I had that idea, and somehow Pagan Taylor over on Instagram is completely psychic, because I did not tell anyone this idea. And she told me, oh hey, I'm sending you some Point d'Esprit lace netting. And it was literally the listing that I had favorited on Etsy, which I don't think is public knowledge. Like, she didn't know that I was already looking for this lace, but she knew somehow it was the exact lace. So she's sending that to me, and that should be here soon. And I think I do have some Point d'Esprit scraps that I can test the embroidery on, so I'm probably gonna do that before the good stuff actually arrives. But yeah, like, how wonderful is that? Pagan Taylor, thank you so much. That was really fantastic of you. So anyway, that is what largely makes up the back. And then we again have that sash that comes around, this time kind of coming up into a point in the center back. And then the neckline in the back is also that same like embroidered net lace. It is not the stuff that is like actually a wide trim. So it is the same lace as the body. And then we also have a whole bunch more of the rosettes. We have 7 rosettes. They're a little bit smaller than the one on the front. And instead of doing a whole spiral around, they are rosette with that picot edge lace kind of rosetted also into them. So there's going to be 7 of those total, 2 at the lower back, 2 at the top of the sash, 2 where all of the yoke stuff comes together, and then 1 at the center back of the neckline. So lots and lots of rosettes. And I have one picture of the inside, which is this picture right here, which is really not very helpful. But what I am seeing in here is that it actually has its own poof built into the bodice. Now, am I gonna do this? Maybe not. However, it looks like it is all mounted onto a very, very lightweight fabric. Honestly, I'm having a hard time figuring out what that might be. I think it might just be a really, really sheer lightweight muslin. And you can see that the one that's in the neckline area is different than what's in the body. And the body, again, is very, very gathered. The body almost looks like a tarlatan weave, but I think that would be way, way, way too stiff. So I'm not sure, but it does have that sort of crosshatch looking weave. And then we've just got a flat weave in the neckline, but these are all just very fine, very almost sheer fabrics. Like, we're not actually seeing the outside, so it's possible that there's also an interlining in there as well. But it's hard to say. But then we do have these poofs that are coming in from the side, these ruffles, to kind of fill out that poofy part right here, like below in the lower bust area, where it's going to be above the sash but below the ruffles. That's where our poofs are aiming for from the inside of this bodice, which I think is really interesting. And then there is a waist stay that is on the inside of the sash portion, which is very structured. It's really not a sash. And then we also do have a little bit of boning, I think just kind of in the sides around here. Again, I don't really think I'm going to do that. I usually do forego the boning in my bodices, to be honest. But yeah, that's just something to keep in note. And oddly enough, we have lace trim inside the bodice. Either that or it is the edge of a lace. To be honest, I'm not sure where that's coming from, but we actually do have a lace trim in the bodice that's kind of going around the edge of that yoke. So I'm not sure why they added that. And it all closes up the back with hooks and eyes. So yeah, that's a kind of an extreme walkthrough of how this bodice is put together. And it's going to be a challenge to figure out even how to build that structure layer that we can put stuff on top of, but that is what we have to figure out next. So I know I said I would be hand sewing the hem very slowly over the course of the next while, but yeah, I just decided to do it all tonight. So it's actually done, same night as that last clip, and now that means that the skirt in its entirety is complete. So I've got the Point Esprit netting from Pagan Tailor here. You can see this is what it looks like. Thank you again so much. And then I also have my like scrap stuff that was already in my stash, which I don't have very much of it. Like this is not enough obviously for the whole bodice, but I think I'm gonna use this to do the test embroidery on because I'm just a little bit worried about like using up this and then not having enough of it. And I know I can get more because I do know the Etsy listing. So that is a possibility. I don't know, like they're definitely different, just to show you the difference. So this, you can see it better on my sleeve. I think this is the one from Etsy, and then this right here is the one from my stash. So you can see that the dots are really, really different. So I don't know, part of my test is like, I just want to test to see if embroidery will work. I did find my water-soluble stabilizer, so that's good because I couldn't find that at first. But yeah, it's definitely going to act differently because this is a larger mesh. The other thing though is that I do really want to tea dye this because it's a very bright white right now. And even though most likely this bodice has faded more yellow over time, I feel like it's probably just gonna look nicer if I do everything just a little bit off-white as opposed to like the bright white. So I do think doing the off-white, now I'm thinking though, like what kind of embroidery thread colors do I have? I do have an off-white, so that'll be fine. But I don't know, maybe I should just do a test first on the white and see how that looks. Or maybe I should just go dye this right now. Let's go dye this. It's about 10 minutes later, but the fabric is now tea dyed. I know I don't have like a before and after side by side to show you here, but it's definitely a significant difference, even though this was only maybe about 3 to 4 minutes in the pot with one single English breakfast tea bag. So pretty good, and I think it's gonna be a good color. It's still a little damp, so I'm not able to embroider on it right away. So I think I'm gonna go walk Lion and let this dry for that half hour and then come back and do our test embroidery on a little piece of this. So I have the embroidery going, as you can see. I did decide to actually use white because the off-white that I have, which is right over here, is so yellow compared to like the just tea dyed fabric. But the thing is, I'm noticing that wherever it's embroidering so far, it's definitely pulling the fabric, and I feel like that is going to look really not great when it is out of the hoop as well. It's like it's actually pulling the stabilizer as well. I don't know if you can tell that, but these wrinkles that you're seeing are really not from the lace net so much as they are the stabilizer. So it's not a very big stitch out. This is the embroidery pattern right here. As you can see, it's 11 minutes total. It's meant to be 2 colors. I'm doing it all one, but I'm not loving it so far, and we're only a few minutes in. Okay, well, the embroidery is done and I don't love it. I mean, I haven't even taken it out of the hoop yet, obviously. One, it's way too bright white. It is just like, it's so white, and I'm sure that it's toned down more because I'm on, you know, the cream colored background there, but it still feels very white. We'll see how I feel once I take the stabilizer off. But the other thing is, I just don't think I like this motif. It's so slim, like it just feels like weird lines. It doesn't read as flowers really. I don't think I like that, so I'd have to find a different motif if I want to do something differently. And then there's the other thing of like, well, yes, this design is nice that it kind of economizes the net and does a lot of the net at one time, but it becomes the reverse for the backing for the stabilizer, because like all of this is wasted because now I have to, you know, take that out and probably tear away most of it and then wash away the stuff that's right underneath the motifs. That's a lot of stabilizer, and the water soluble stabilizer tends to be a lot more expensive than the tearaway, and this is the water soluble stuff. So I don't know that this is worth it. All right, I have washed away the stabilizer. This is what it looks like without the stabilizer in there. It is still a little bit damp. I think technically this is the side that you should be looking at, the front side. I do not love it. I think it's the design, really. Like, I actually don't mind the fact that it's white. It is a little brighter than I would like, but it's not terrible now that we don't have the backing or like the table behind it. But the design itself is what's pretty awful, I think. It just looks like weird little worms or something. Like, I don't know. It doesn't look good. It definitely doesn't look floral. So that design is not going to work out. I'm going to see if maybe there's like some design that I can find fairly easily that would be like a pretty inexpensive download that maybe I could purchase to do instead, and see if maybe I'll do a test out of that. But I'm honestly wondering, like, is this just crazy? Is trying to do this embroidery just crazy? So I am not positive if you will be seeing more of this project next week. It is possible that I may wait on actually making this bodice until I can find a lace that I like. I don't want to put this off more because like I'm midway through the project and there are no laces locally that I can find, which is annoying, but I mean, this pattern is definitely not doing it, and I feel like the net by itself is not enough either. Like, there definitely needs to be something there. I'm just not liking what this is. And I will also need to get more of the wash away stabilizer before I could do like all of this. And granted, I don't need to do all of this. Like, I could very easily figure out what size of patterns I need, what size of shapes that I need for all of this, and then like give myself a little excess for when it kind of squinches in the fabric a little bit as it embroiders, and just embroider those sections. Like, that is the way really to do this, because that makes a lot more sense. But still, I don't like this particular embroidery. It's just not going to work. So I'm going to do some digging. That's going to be it for this video though, and you may or may not get this project next week. It might be something else entirely. I might actually decide to start on my English Regency court gown, so we'll see. I think either way it will be an exciting video. But if you liked this video, please go ahead. You just bit me. But if you like this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube at least once a week, with sewing vlogs like this out on Tuesdays and sometimes additional content out on Saturdays. But I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have links to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below, or you can send me a super thanks or join my YouTube channel memberships right here on YouTube below the video. I'd also like to take this time to thank my absolutely wonderful Patreon patrons. Seriously, I could not do all of this without you guys. You guys are amazing, and particularly those of you at the Romantic, Victorian, and Edwardian level tiers, who are Jean, Dan, Kim, Audra, Emily, Janet, Deborah, Max, Liz, Robin, Kimberly, Nurse Anita, Janelle, Chaos Chan, Linda, Jen, and Dale. Thank you all so much. And thank you all for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!